Hi. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us on the call today, and good morning to those folks who are joining us from the Pacific Islands. My name is Akil Vohra. I'm a senior advisor at the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. I'm joined by Chen, who's Special Counsel, Office of General Counsel at the Department of Education. And we'll be talking a little bit about the White House Initiative on AAPIs and also the RFI data disaggregation request that went out from the initiative as well as the Department of Education. So just to let folks know, this is a webinar and a conference call. So if you're listening on right now and haven't joined on, please do join the webinar. For those folks who are on the webinar, you can see that we actually have a chat portion that is in the lower right-hand corner. So if you have questions throughout the event, please let us know, and we'll go ahead and try to respond to your questions as we move along. So with that, I just wanted to get into a little bit about the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Our purpose is to ensure that AAPIs have access to the federal government and ensure that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are taking advantage of resources that the federal government is offering. We began originally under President Clinton, where our mandate included a wide array of activities. We also existed under the Bush administration, where we principally focused on economic issues. And now, as we're reauthorized under President Obama, our mandate is the largest that it's ever been. So as you can see, we focus on health issues, economic and community development, educational opportunities, and civil and immigrant rights. So my portfolio at the initiative focuses on education, civil rights, and working with our commission. And we hope we get this information out to you to really effectuate change in the community. I'd like to talk a little bit about the 2010 census. It really provided a great opportunity to examine where the Asian American Pacific Islander community is, as well as let us know about the growth in minority communities. As we all know, we will soon become a minority-majority country, and keeping that in mind, recognizing that examining the needs of minority communities is going to be critical in all aspects of the federal government's work, including ensuring that we have the highest proportion of college graduates by 2020. So keeping in mind where the data is driving us, that played a critical part in development of this request for information, or RFI. The 2010 census also showed us where the Asian American Pacific Islander community is. And traditionally, we expect high numbers in Hawaii, California, Washington, New Jersey, New York. But what we've seen is that there is now emerging communities in different places, including Texas, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Minnesota. And with these emerging and new communities, there is a greater need for examining what the needs are for these communities as they're developing. So a critical part, again, of the RFI is to really glean practices and policies that established universities and communities have developed, and also recognize where there might be gaps in newer communities to ensure that the federal government is addressing all these concerns. So when we talk about the AAPI community and the need for data disaggregation, we want to emphasize that the community is not a monolith. We comprise a wide variety of backgrounds, languages, and cultures that need to be taken into account when formulating policy. So when you say Asian, that really doesn't describe, it doesn't adequately describe somebody who is Korean or somebody else who's South Asian. Their needs can be very different. And for policymakers to recognize the needs of these disparate communities will help us make effective decisions down the road. So I'm going to turn it over now to Chen to talk a little bit about the RFI and walk you through some of the reasons why we did the RFI, some of the issues that we're asking communities about, and hopefully to provide a lot of guidance for you. We hope to have a couple of polls and try to make it as interactive as possible. So we may ask folks to kind of participate as we move forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jay.
Great. Thanks a lot, everybody. So I will basically walk you through the RFI, and we'll talk a little bit about why we're doing the RFI, and at the end of this, we'll also talk about how for you to submit comments. If you look at the slide that we're showing right now, this will describe it. Okay. So right now, the White House initiative, we basically put out an RFI for data disaggregation within the Asian and Native Hawaiian student population. And we're actually particularly interested in what state educational agencies are doing, local educational agencies, and also institutes of higher education around the country are doing with this data, and whether they're actually, making the effort to disaggregate the data to look at these subcategories of students. The reason why this disaggregation of data is really important is because as the Asian population in the United States continues to grow, it also becomes a lot more diverse than what we traditionally think of as Asian. So the current data that we have right now isn't really showing us the big picture, right, as to how each individual group is functioning and some of the struggles that they're going through. And if we disaggregate the data, this will allow us to identify the achievement gaps that really need more attention, and this will allow us to also, better serve the most needy subgroups within the AAPI community. So as we continue on, I'll show you later on how to actually submit comments to the slides, to the RFI itself, but we will walk through the context right now. So as many of you probably already know, that Asians, they actually tend to be associated with, this traditional model minority myth where they're considered high achieving from the middle class professional family context. And so a lot of times when we think of these Asians, they tend to be associated with, levels of higher education, like four-year universities. But the reality is that APA students, a higher percentage of them actually attend community college, not four-year universities. And there's a big struggle there because a lot of these students who attend these community colleges, they come from groups that we traditionally don't really associate with that higher subset. So this could be like that struggle from the Vietnamese community or the Hmong community or the Cambodian community. They tend to be first-generation community college students. They usually have to work in addition to going to college. So there's a lot of struggles here. And the problem is that because the data set isn't really specifically focusing on that, we're not really able to see how these individual populations are doing. So one of the comments that we got on the RFI today, for example, was from a lady from the University of Texas, and she actually directs administering academic programs there, and she actually noted that one of the greatest challenges that they have at the university was the lack of aggregated data. At the University of Texas, 18% of the undergraduate population is APA, and the administrators there actually feel like, okay, well, we have 18%. That means, we're adequately representing the Asian population. But the reality is because that 18% is sort of a generic only Asian category and it's not divided up in disaggregated subgroups, we don't actually know what groups are part of that 18%. And so in Texas right now, one of the largest Asian communities is Vietnamese, but there's actually no way for the University of Texas to assess whether the Vietnamese community is being, admitted at a certain rate in terms of admission and graduation, because that data is not actually tracked. So for us, this is where we're reaching out to all of you for you to give us this information as to whether any of these policies are being taken and what you can be doing. So the next 4 slides that we're going to go through are basically the context in which we want your responses. and how we want to find out how each of you are also doing sort of this data disaggregation. Basically, the goal here is that with the RFIs, we want to gather as much information as possible related to disaggregation of data, and also use that data on these subgroups and see how we can disseminate this later on to the public. I want to point out that all of these questions that we're providing in the slideshow and in the RFI, these are just guides. I mean, these are particularly important information that we would like to know, but if you have other information that you want that might not necessarily be directly responsive to one of these questions, please feel free to add that in your response themselves. So, for example, the first section that we're looking at is, does your SEA-LEA school actually have a policy in place for disaggregating the data? SEA. A question came up as to what does SEA mean. SEA actually stands for State Educational Agencies. This is one of those Washington, D.C. alphabet soup things that we use all the time at the Department of Education. LEA is Local Educational Agencies, and IHEs are Institutes of Higher Education. So these are basically academic institutes that we're looking for and seeing if they're actually taking these policies to disaggregate data. Let's see. So these are some of the questions. So that would be the first one, is we're interested in policy. Like, do you have any policies in place right now for disaggregating data? Like, has the university or, school or academic institute, has it recognized the need for doing this? And what have they been doing in conjunction with that? Okay. We'll move on to the next. So the next context question that we're asking for right now is data collection. So assuming that you have a policy in place, what is the implementation of the collection of this data that you have set up already within? So again, here are some guiding questions that you can look at. We feel free to elaborate if it's not just for example, a questionnaire or a survey and you have some other methodology, we want to hear about it. If you have some sort of data system that you're implementing within either on a statewide basis or even a citywide basis, these are all very, very interesting things to us that we would find would be useful. Okay. So the next slide that we're looking at right now is also looking at, if you have these policies in place and you've begun that process of disaggregating data, have you found it useful to sort of the own work that you have, at your university or school or institute? And tell us how exactly you've been implementing them and how it's been useful for you. In our cases, we find that it's, like I said earlier, that there was that academic from the University of Texas. She said that if they were to break down the data a lot more and be able to track each individual, they would actually be able to see some of these more at-risk ethnicities, like the Vietnamese group in Texas, to see whether they're being admitted and graduating and how they compare to the rest of the APA groups. So that would be an example of one effective use of this disaggregated data. We can use it for things like awarding scholarships or redirecting resources or national grants. All of this would be really useful in that context. Yeah. That's great. All right. And so the last section that we're particularly interested in is, in this implementation of this disaggregation of data, have you faced any particular challenges or barriers? For example, what challenges has the adoption of the practices or policy, has that made that difficult? Are these common capacity challenges such as training or technology? Like, are there other issues that go along with disaggregating data? There's a lot of potential challenges here, and obviously we haven't outlined every single one of them, and that's what we want to hear about. When you let us know exactly what sort of challenges that we're facing in this process, that will help us better design our programs later on when we think about them. Okay. Okay, so this would be the last question, is how has the data been publicly reported or used? So not just in a sense of how effective has it been for your academic or your institute, how have you actually pushed this out onto, you know, the other data, whether it's been used in outreach efforts, are you adopting this, you know, specifically targeting specific groups after because of what you found with that disaggregation of data? You know, these are all things that we're very, very much interested in and we would like your responses on. Okay, so now after this, I will walk you through how to actually submit a comment. Do we want to take questions first?
Yeah, I think what we may want to do is take questions at the end.
Okay.
And I just want to emphasize what Jay mentioned as well. The RFI was specifically designed to be a little bit open. And again, this is what the Department of Education has been doing since Arnie took over, is really looking at some of the best practices and policies and initiatives that are happening at the grassroots level. And, you know, I've had an opportunity to visit with many institutions across the United States, and there are always innovative practices that are occurring. We didn't want to frame the RFI in a way that would exclude any of the amazing innovations and suggestions you all have. So more is better for us. So when the question's posed, do you have a policy, and if folks will respond, it's better, you can simply respond yes, but it's a lot better if you can provide us that policy, provide us a little bit of background in terms of what it took to actually make that policy, to implement that policy, and what's the reasoning behind some of those things. And that goes for everything. When we discuss costs, you know, simply stating that cost is a barrier is very helpful to us. But it's even more helpful if you can articulate, we've looked into this issue, we've looked at different data systems, this is how much it's going to cost, we're going to have to hire additional personnel, and by providing that context to us, we can help kind of move this forward. I'll let Jay talk a little bit about how to submit a comment, but I briefly wanted to mention that our overall goal is the following: to obtain information from SEAs, LEAs, institutes of higher education, and community-based organizations to find out a series of policies and practices that we can then highlight to encourage technical assistance from the Department of Education. We're also deliberating about a symposium that we will host to have, hopefully, many of you attend to talk about exactly what's happening and have an in-person discussion. But in order for all that to happen, it's critical for every organization out there to submit a response. So if we receive 3 responses, it'll probably be a lot more difficult for us to put on a symposium. But if we get a lot of the institutions involved, a lot of the community groups, I think it'll send a strong message about how important this topic is. So, Jay, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. So there's just basically 2 ways for you to submit your comments to this RFI. The first one is if you want to submit it by hard copy, attached on this PowerPoint slide, you can see the address in which you can send it to. This will allow you, you know, if you want to send something by hard copy, you want to type up a letter, anything like that, you can actually send it through U.S. mail. But what we would also encourage you to use is also online, which is the federal e-rulemaking portal. And in the next few slides, I'll just kind of run through that and show you generally how to pull that up. So if you go to regulations.gov, it's actually very, very clear. This is the federal rulemaking portal. All federal regulations that are being considered and put out for public comment, all of them are available on this website. So the first thing you want to do is go to this website. So it's www.regulations.gov. And so the first thing that you'll see here is on our example slide is this question of, oh, participate today. And so in that search bar, if you type in the following code, ED 2012 OESE 0009 with the dashes, and search for this, this will actually pull up the RFI that we're talking about right now. So, I mean, the site has been designed to be very user-friendly. So once you pull it up, the first thing you'll see is the actual RFI itself. You can click it, and that'll bring up the RFI so you can read it, and you can see it in its entirety. On the right-hand side, there's a blue button that says Comment Now. So if you want to submit a response, that's where you would submit a response that we're asking for. So you would just click Comment Now, and it'll bring up a little window, as you see here, asking you for all of your information. On the left-hand side, that'll be just some basic information, and then on the right-hand side, it's the actual comment itself. I want to point out that when you submit the comment, it's actually the policy of the department to post every single comment that we've received in its entirety. So your personal email address and things like that, that won't show up. But however, you want to be careful about what you type into the comment itself, and make sure you don't include any personal identifiable information from students or anything in general that you don't want to publicly post out on the internet. But at the same time, it's very important. Again, as detailed and as cleared as possible would be great, but I just kind of wanted to make sure you're aware of that if you decide to submit a comment. So what happens after? So after you've submitted all of your comments, we are closing the RFI for comments by July 3rd, so it's very important that you take the time to submit it before then. We are going to develop a summary of the responses that we see from the RFI, and the Department of Education itself will respond to a lot of the comments. We hope to take those responses and to deliver voluntary technical assistance. And as Akil mentioned earlier, one of the things that we're talking about right now is possibly putting together a symposium for a lot of the commenters and other participating agencies for discussion of best practices. Here we're listing where you can receive an electronic copy of the Department of Education's RFI. As I said before, you can pull it up on regulations.gov with that code that we pointed out earlier, but here is another link where you can actually look at it. So again, some frequently asked questions. When is the last date? Is, again, a reminder, July 3rd, 2012. Who can respond to this RFI? We welcome all public input. It's not necessarily that you have to be from an institution with, for example, a high percentage of APAs. Any sort of aspect where you can, maybe you face the similar problems, not with just APA, but other sort of data disaggregation. Those are all welcome comments, so we want to see them all and be able to, figure out what the best practices are. Why should I respond to the RFI? As we've discussed extensively how important this is to disaggregate this data. So we're looking to you, the experts in the field, who would be able to best give us the idea of how to do it. And last, again, it's the Department of Education that's going to be analyzing the responses, and we're going to be publishing a final document that contains a summary of the recommendations.